Okay, it is 6 o'clock. We are broadcasting. So Dr. Lester, when you're ready to introduce the event, you can go ahead and do that.
Good evening, all. Thank you so much for joining us for a first for Project Humanities at Arizona State University. My name is Neil Lester, and I'm a professor of English here, but I also direct a university initiative called Project Humanities. And Project Humanities has been around for about 10 years, trying to do two things: to bring individuals and communities together to talk, listen, and connect. Tonight's program is part of a series that we started last semester on parenting. It is not a training session, but rather critical conversations with experts and community members about how to be better parents, how to be better adults, how to be better people. Tonight's program, like the other four that we've had, bring together experts who will not lecture to us. This is not a TED Talk, but rather a conversation. It's all part of what Project Humanities calls Humanity 101. Humanity 101 is not a class, it is not a course, but rather a series of principles here that we think are common to all cultures. And what it means is that these are strategic ways that we can be better and do better. And the principles are compassion, empathy, forgiveness, integrity, kindness, respect, self-reflection. These are not faith-based, but rather faith in our shared and individual humanity. Tonight's program is being recorded, and we hope that you will take something from this program that you didn't necessarily bring. I will ask you to stay till the end so that you can participate actively in the conversation and pose questions to our experts. We may not be able to answer all the questions, but we hope that we raise new questions so that you will continue to follow not only Project Humanities, but the work we're trying to do to make us do better and to be better. I'd like to take this time to introduce our experts for the evening. Our facilitator is Dr. Alyssa Kawam, who has degrees in social work. Her main area of work has concerned children, youth, and families in the areas of poverty, violence, substance abuse, and child welfare. She is an expert in issues around parenting, motherhood, trauma, and PTSD. Our other panelist is Neil Tift. He's an outreach project coordinator for the Native American Fatherhood and Families Association here in Mesa, Arizona. And he has also been the director of father involvement for the Crisis Arizona in Mesa, Arizona as well. He is director of training for 2 national fatherhood organizations in DC and has worked extensively in the area of teaching ethics, child psychology, gender studies, and human service administration. He has degrees in counseling, psychology, HB Branch, as we know him fondly here locally, is a ASU alum who has many accolades, both as an entrepreneur, as an artist, as a social justice thought leader, but most importantly, that's here in Phoenix, Arizona. And then we have Cusette Oden, who is Director of Community Resources and Trainings at BIAS. BIAS is a social service that provides care for families and youth through congregate care services, such as licensed group homes and Building Resilient Families program. BIAS Place coordinates care, assesses resources, and collaborates with other organizations and agencies to meet the needs of children and families in Arizona. I want to thank all of our experts for being here, and I want to thank you, participants out there, for also joining us. And I will say this, we ask that if there are technical difficulties along the way, that you practice one of those principles, forgiveness. We are doing something that is a first for us, and we hope it won't be the last. And the success of this depends on your engagement and the extent to which this actually works. So at this point, I thank you again and turn it over to our facilitator, moderator for the panel, Dr. Kwam. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I'm so honored to be with you in this digital space and an ever-changing time to help guide our panel through talking about this topic. To echo Dr. Lester, I apologize if my dogs bark in the background. I'm working hard to keep them quiet, but 'tis the season for dogs barking when you work. So to that point, I want to again welcome you all. My name is Dr. Elisa Kawam. I'm on faculty in the School of Social Work at ASU here. And tonight we're going to talk about toxic parenting. And before we officially start, I just wanted to offer a few remarks and a few thoughts to just sort of keep us all on the same page. It's super important that we all acknowledge that you can't really be an expert on parenting. It's the hardest job that you are never trained on how to do, and you often kind of figure it out as you go, right? So we know that going in, we know it's difficult, we know it's challenging. And our esteemed panel really comes from many different backgrounds and many different walks of life. And we all share a passion for families, youth, well-being, and we want to ensure and communicate very clearly up front as well that when we talk about the word toxic, that doesn't evoke happy feelings and lollipops and barbecues, right? It comes with somewhat of a negative connotation, and we do not take that word lightly. That's an intentional word we are using, not to paint it in a negative light, but to stress the seriousness of parenting and the importance that it holds in our community. We never intend to shame or blame anybody, and this really is an open forum for us as a community to come together, to present ideas and concepts, and to start to think about parenting it in different angles. We hope, the whole panel and the whole Project Humanities team, we hope that you're able to take some of these things back to your families and your communities and your spaces, and continue this dialogue and continue to improve the work that you do and the own families that you live in. We embrace all cultures and all walks of life, and really strive to look at not only areas of improvement, but strengths and things that are going great, and building blocks we can jump off of to do new things. So as we go through this and we talk about toxic parenting, and we talk with the panel about their areas of expertise and interest, some of you may identify with some of the things we're talking about, either as a parent yourself or as a child who was parented this way. We ask that you care for yourself, and you care for your mind and your heart, with compassion and with empathy here. And if at any time you're not comfortable or you're feeling upset by something, that you excuse yourself, and make sure that if there's anything that we can do, you let us know. But we did want to put that out there, that some of you may resonate with this stuff, and that's okay. And just guard your heart tonight as we talk about these things. Life is hard, and we are really all in this together. So we're excited. And with all of that said, I hand the mic back to Dr. Lester so he can get us going with our first activity.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Kwam. One of the things, as I said before, we don't want to make this necessarily a TED Talk or a lecture. So we're going to try to engage the chat feature with a couple of questions. So if we could go to the next slide for our Think and Share. Thank you. I want you, all of those in the audience who are participating in this, think of how may a parent cross their child's boundaries. So in the process of answering these questions, and we're not asking you to write an essay, just jot down what comes to your mind first. And we have some people on the team who are sort of looking at through those responses to see exactly where we are, so that we know that we at least have a baseline of understanding. All right. How may a parent cross their child's boundaries? So I want to give you about a minute to jot down something in the chat feature, and then we'll have people looking at those, and we'll pass those on to our experts so that they might respond. How may a parent cross their child's boundaries? Okay, Dr. Quam, are you able to see some of those? Okay. And one of the reasons that we're starting this way is because sometimes it's often easier to start with what we already know before trying to offer a definition that sort of gets slippery. So we want to see what people already say and think about these words in sort of everyday terms. So Dr. Quam, you want to respond to some of what you see there, what we see?
Absolutely. This is fabulous. A lot of people are talking about respecting emotional boundaries of children, and they're freeform emoting and not respecting that. Going through belonging, sort of an invasion of privacy, phone monitoring, and in the digital age, what does that mean? Snooping, all of that, social media stuff. Sharenting, which is a new phrase for me. I don't know what sharenting is. But I would, Michelle had put that. If she wants to maybe expand upon that, that would be great.
And that Michelle is Dr. Michelle Melton. She's one of our community ambassadors. So she is a psychologist
Yes.
here. So she
Great.
may be able to elaborate on that in the course of the conversation.
Oh, that would be fabulous.
Thank you, Dr. Melton. Okay.
Another fabulous one, which is forcing physical contact. And this has been a whole area of research where you are now, as a parent, encouraged to let your kids choose their level of contact rather than forcing contact with others. So that was good. Ariana, thank you. That was fabulous. Forcing them to do things they don't want to do, making them adults before they're ready. In the literature, this is called parentifying, and not letting them have a childhood.
Well, I think that's interesting. The one that about the forcing boundaries. Come give Uncle Eddie a kiss, or give Aunt Susie a hug.
Yes.
The child has no real stake in that.
All yes. Right? And in fact, the new thing now is hug, handshake, or thumbs up. And you kind of let them pick what they want to do.
Okay. Is that an acronym?
Oh, no. My sister is a child development person, and she knows all that stuff.
Okay.
Oversharing on social media. That's a new one.
Okay.
That's super interesting. Making them finish food. That's an interesting one.
Oh,
that's
wow.
Very interesting. Again, going back to sort of a boundary violation.
Right. Well, and that whole sense of eat this, it's good for you is interesting, right? Because if you're throwing up from eating something, then I don't know how good that is for you.
Right. Or not respecting. A lot of these have to circulate around respect, not respecting a child's.
Very good.
And then spanking. So that's a big one in our work as well, is that physical discipline.
Okay.
Wow.
Good. This is encouraging. All right, let's go to number 2. Notice that we're not commenting on what's right and wrong, but we're commenting on where people are so that we establish a baseline of where we're starting. The second question, if we could get that on the screen, please. The second question is, what actions, words may cause a child to feel shamed, guilty, disrespected, unsupported, judged, pressured, inadequate, fearful, operative words here, on a regular basis. So what actions, words may cause a child to feel shamed, guilty, disrespected, unsupported, judged, pressured, inadequate, fearful, on a regular basis. So take a minute to kind of jot down some ideas that come to mind in response to that prompt. We can invite some of the experts in also to comment on some of these if you'd like.
Yes, please. So these are fabulous.
Yeah. So HB and Cuzette, come on in.
So a lot of these have to go back to sort of the cluster and the first question about disrespect. So comparing the comparison game either to someone else or a sibling, public humiliation, that's super interesting too, because one of the previous ones was about oversharing on social media. Telling them they don't know how to do things, or they're just simply not enough. Sort of that shaming, that blaming and shaming. You should be smarter than this, making side comments about their sexuality or calling them names, judging them by the way that they look, their physical body, which is huge for LGBTQIA youth, right? Who are vulnerable anyway, and then if they're chastised for that. Yelling, guilt shaming, forcing of situations or scenarios. So that's interesting when there's a cultural or religious rub there. Minimizing, saying something isn't a big deal. Punishing for grades without knowing the core problem. The when I was your age, sort of, we had pandemics, you know. You're just like your father or your mother. So in couples that are split or divorced, co-parenting, that can happen a lot. Extramarital affairs and how that's interesting. What actions or words may cause a child to feel shamed? Extramarital affairs, interesting. How they choose to dress, coordinated, colors, not coordinated. And then always pointing out what can go wrong versus right.
Okay.
Do any of the other experts have anything that they perhaps want to add? These are super
Kizette and HB, do you want to tune in to us? Kizette, you're still muted.
All right, there we go.
All right, there we go. All right, come on, Kizette.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it and all the different feedback to really analyze the different levels and the different perspectives of what's unhealthy for a child and what parents can do that isn't in preparation, isn't preparing the kid for life, right? Because I believe that's our role, is to prepare them for the world, and to do so with joy, do so with love, but also to do so with awareness. So I think it could be toxic and could be hurtful and painful if we're not even preparing them for the challenges of the world, right? If we're giving them only this joy, only everything is going to be great, everything is going to be great, and then when they get out there, they get met with any kind of opposition and they just can't handle it, right? So how do they, in a healthy way, manage losing a game, right? Losing things not going their way. If we're always building that up, I think that could be extremely damaging as well. And we often don't talk about that side of it because we think as long as we're making them happy, we're doing good by parenting. And if you're making your kid happy all the time, you're not doing good at parenting all the time.
Gizette, did you want to say something?
Yeah, to piggyback back off what Dr. Alyssa was saying, things that may have been acceptable maybe in the 70s when I was being reared wouldn't be acceptable in this day and age, right? Because as we grow and learn, when we know better, we do better, right? So the type of parenting that my mother may have received may have not been good in this day and age. There are things that are against the law now. And parents don't realize it. They will make statements like, oh, I turned out just fine. But we're raising kids in a different day and age. And many times it's not purposeful that the parents are harming their children by saying certain things, not being aware that we live in a day and age where different people are acceptable. Everybody doesn't have to be the same. And we really need to be open to our children being expressive with their clothing, with their sexuality at a certain age, with how they communicate their needs and their questions. You know, it was back years ago, a child is to be seen and not heard. And now we really need kids to be heard. We really need to know what they're thinking and that they're not just locking themselves in the room and stuffing their feelings.
I like that, sort of going back to some of those old mantras we have. You know, the same one I thought about when HB was commenting is sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt you.
Right.
that's clearly something that's not true.
Clearly.
It's clearly not true. And if you hear that over and over again, Dr. Kwan, I imagine that can be pretty toxic also.
I mean, absolutely. This is a great segue for when we actually talk about what is toxic parenting. But it's funny, all of this stuff is sort of categorizing and coding around disrespect and then a communication breakdown somewhere. So whatever decade it is, whatever issue it is, it's when that communication is broken down, then there's a potential for toxicity. So I both of the other experts had discussed that a little bit, that need for communication. So and a few of the people had the attendees had discussed how or had commented about social media, and I often reflect how I was bullied in middle school and high school, but I knew that once I left and I went home, I was fine. Now, because I was away from them, right? Now it follows them online, and they're cyberbullied and constantly, and it's sort of a 24/7 environment. So even just what Gisette was saying about times are different now, and HB is saying we need to set kids up for success in a very different world, and that's going to take communication. It's a new day. Absolutely.
All right. Well, let's move to our third question. Again, this is to just get the juices flowing. How may a parent neglect a child's emotional needs? How may a parent neglect a child's emotional needs? So take about a minute and jot down your sort of free thoughts regarding that as well.
Wow. Some of the ones that are coming in are really profound. So parents who have self-destructive behaviors or substance issues and they're in denial about it, just denial in general can lead to neglectful behavior. As opposed to minimizing, saying you're overreacting all the time, you're blowing it up, telling kids to suck it up or man up. We hear that one a lot. Gaslighting, super important. Ignoring them, not acknowledging they exist. So again, not allowing for that emotive communication. Let's see, ignoring the need for communication, being over-consumed and sort of self-absorbed in their own stuff. Telling kids to use their own words when they don't necessarily have the vocabulary to explain. Sometimes I'm missing words. You're not bleeding, you're okay. I actually heard that one a lot. You're fine. Deal with it.
Some of that leads to the sort of toxic masculinity with the whole man up and there's nothing wrong and don't be a sissy and don't be a wuss. We hear that a lot in sort of these athletic arenas and sports teams, and it's just talk.
Yeah. Withdrawing affection or attention as a form of punishment. So punish it when a kid reaches out, the parents kind of pull away. Parents who avoid just that difficult communication, parents who are narcissistic, not validating kids' thoughts because they're only kids.
Wow.
Always saying, oh, kids don't know anything, repeating the mistakes their parents made, which gets, that's just the very difficult nature of parenting in general. Not attending to, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No.
Oh, not attending to kids' daily lives. HB said, holding kids responsible for 30 years of wisdom. Can you maybe expand on that a little bit? That seems like 3 books.
No, absolutely. I think one of the biggest mistakes we make, we get frustrated with kids when they do something we wouldn't do, but we don't recognize the fact that we've been here for a while. You know what I mean? And it goes back to what you were saying about respecting. You have to respect your kids. People ask me, how did you get your kids where they are and things like that. First and foremost, I respect them as human beings. I look at them and their behavior from an age appropriate standpoint. So it's something I wouldn't do, but is it age appropriate for a 7-year-old? So I probably shouldn't be losing my mind that I got to tell them the same thing over and over and over again, because it happens. Matter of fact, we tend to hold kids, hold them to standards higher than we hold ourselves. We excuse away when we have to be told something over and over again, when we're disrespectful to authorities, like when we get pulled over and we're not friendly to the cop, or we're trashing all of our politicians and leaders of the country, but we tell them to respect authority, right? So these contradictions are just really, they create confusion. And a confused mind does nothing. They don't know what to do and where to turn.
Yep.
And so, I look at when my kids was 5, I had to remember the fact that 5 years before that, they didn't know what water was. They didn't know what the sun was. They didn't know what anything was. And they've done so much in those 5 years. So I got to respect them for what they've been able to do in just those 5 years. And then I look at people, I've had jobs where, and I know people, they've been working on a job for 5 years and they still ain't figured it out. So why should we be mad at the kids for not figuring out the planet in 5, 7, 10, 15 years? You know what I mean? It takes some time. So I think that helps bring us back to earth a little bit and allow us to just kind of respect where they are in their process. That's what I'm thinking
at. So beautifully said.
What I love about this all is that you keep coming back to this as though we had it scripted. These notions of humanity 101, which Michelle Mace, who is also joining us tonight, is a co-founder of the Come Rain or Shine Foundation that has underwritten these programs for us. It really is about these principles here. So I love it that these key words keep showing up, the lack thereof. So it gives us an opportunity to sort of change behavior, which leads into our sort of, what are we thinking about when we talk about toxic? And then I'll toss it over to you, Dr. Kwam. What do we mean by toxic parenting behaviors? And I'll say, as the team, we initially started by calling this narcissistic parents, and we felt like that was actually quite loaded. Nobody teaches us how to be parents in a kind of perfect way. There's no manual. There's certainly lots of books out there, but the books don't necessarily apply to every child and every parent. And so we also had talked about this in terms of toxic parenting, and decided that rather than talk about toxic parenting as though that's something that's static, we talk about this in terms of toxic parenting behaviors, because behaviors can be modified and changed. So I hope that in there's hopefulness and there's possibility. But when we talk about toxic parenting, and I'll toss this over to you, Dr. Kwam, what are we talking about? The next slide, please, Rachel.
So while we wait for the slide to come up, you hit on something so profound, Dr. Lester, is that it's not like you get a label of being a toxic parent, done, move on. It's parenting is a process, and it's really about healing, parental healing, and finding your way as a parent, and acknowledging what you're doing really good and where we can work on doing some things. So when we think about toxic, I want us to really use that word with seriousness, but also as more of an analogy rather than a prescription or a diagnosis. And so one of the main hallmarks of toxic parenting is that it's repeated behavior. So kids learn through patterns. They learn by cause and effect. They learn by schedules. They learn by socio-emotional role modeling. They learn how to emote and react by watching the world around them. And for about the first 13 years of their life, it's by watching their caregivers and their kin emote. And then that kind of shifts to peer for a little while during puberty. And so kids really take cues and they mimic from the world around them. And so toxic parenting is any long-term or ongoing patterned behavior that is rooted in any sort of manipulation or guilt or fear or unhealthy boundaries, all the stuff we've talked about already. It was this way when I was a kid, it needs to be this way, belittling or minimizing or having inappropriate expectations for a child. And so the thing here is that if you have 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 moments where you're not your best parent, that's that's okay, that's expected. But it's the buildup, it's that repetitive, iterative process over time that creates neural pathways in your brain that then condition responses long term. So that's why some of you who are parents now who may identify with some of these characteristics, it's because you were mimicking your environment, and over time these patterns again built these brain pathways of cause and effect. Of it's a fight, fight, or freeze response, right? So it's we have to think about the long-term buildup of these patterns over time. Often in mental health, when we're doing any sort of trying to unpack or understand behavior, we look at frequency, how often it happened, intensity, how intense it was, duration, so how long did it happen, and then an onset, which is when did it start. So the acronym is FIDO: frequency, intensity, duration, onset. And then within my field of social work, we always look at, okay, something happened, something potentially negative happened. What was the availability of strengths or supports or anything to kind of counteract that? So if something happens, but then right away there's a reparative attempt, and then there's ways to learn from that, that's a lot better than something that's unacknowledged and again happens over time. And that helps us determine the impact of behaviors or circumstances or situations over time. Yep, FIDO. If anybody ever takes a class on the DSM, that's how you diagnose in the DSM: frequency, intensity, duration, onset, and then in social work, availability of strengths. Yep. And I actually want to pause before we move on and loop back to the last question, because Gisette had an emotion, not an emotion, but a physical reaction when we talked about an affirmative reaction when we were talking about physical closeness being used as a form of punishment. And in light of toxic parenting, and in light of what HB said, I wanted to loop back and have you share your expertise on that, because you lightened up and you're like, yeah. So would you mind telling us a little bit and contextualizing in everything we've talked about so far? Oh, I think you're muted. There we go.
Okay, so the reason why I lit up, we just had a group about this. Parents meeting together, just going over some of the verbiage that they use and some ways that they hold back affection when a child does not act in the way they would like them to act. One person hit on something in particular, and she said, oh, my child is just an attention seeker. Everyone needs attention, whether we're a human, whether we're an animal. Everybody on earth needs some type of attention. And it's really detrimental when we label children attention seekers, because they go into the adult world at times and feel like, I don't want to be seen. It's almost like you want to be invisible at that point because you don't want to be known as an attention seeker. I think many times children do things that are negative as well as positive to gain attention that they require, but so do adults. And so just having that conversation recently with some parents and really talking about and explaining how, making it relatable, right? So once you start to see adults need attention, I can give my puppy lots of attention. My child may need that same attention, right? Husbands need attention from their wives and vice versa. We are human beings, and especially with everything going on now, it's going to be harder to get that human contact and attention that we so dearly need and value.
That was wonderful. I the reason I keep muting myself is because my husband and I have 3 rescue dogs, and they all had experiences of trauma. And it's very interesting to me to think about how if a dog or a cat has experienced something traumatic or was not taken care of as a baby, you would say, you would tell someone, be very careful, don't sneak up on them, don't use a loud voice. But we don't offer those same sort of allowances to kids, or let alone adults, right? Forget about adults. But this idea that we need to care for each other and hold each other like fragile eggs is somewhat lost. I don't know. I don't know at what point. But HB, did you have anything to add to what Gisette had said? That was beautiful. Thank you.
No, it really was. And she was hitting points and I couldn't do nothing but nod my head. Because once again, you know, just I feel like it was in tandem to what I was saying, as far as holding kids to a higher level than we hold ourselves. You know what I mean? We lose our temper. We get upset. We need attention, just like the sister said. And then we get mad at them for that very same thing. You know what I mean? Taking on parenting is huge. And if you're going to take it on, take it on. If you're going to do it, then be prepared to do it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. My oldest child is about to be 15, but from what I hear, it don't stop at 18 and 25 and 30 from my understanding. I don't know this for sure yet, but that's the rumor in the street. So I think I'm gonna be parenting as long as I'm on the planet as a result of this, because once they get old enough, I'm gonna have grandkids, right? And so, you know, just really trying to be, sometimes we can be more understanding of our friends than we are of our own children. We can be more committed to a romantic relationship or trying to even start one or begin one than we are for our needs of our kids. So it's a lot of, I think, missteps out here. And even though we do parent for quite some time, they're only in our house for so long before they're adults. So whatever sacrifices we make, it's not forever. It's not forever. And then we can move on. Unless your kid hit 18 and then you had another newborn and you got 18 more years in the game. I can't really speak to that one. But yeah, that's my feedback on that.
You know, it's interesting, if I could add something here. Toni Morrison writes about children and parenting a lot in her works. And she says something about children are the best that we adults have produced and created. And so there's a way in which that resonates with this conversation, in that whatever is not quite whole in us, we sort of, as parents, want to make it whole in the child. And sometimes that can take some pretty toxic strategies of trying to do that. Whether it's, I want you to be the athlete that I wasn't, I want you to be the doctor that I wasn't, the engineer that I wasn't, the student that I wasn't. And it's interesting because Michelle Mace has, on a number of occasions at previous meetings, talked about reparenting, and the fact that there are those who need to somehow feel whatever was empty or missing in us as children, then we're trying to somehow find that in children. And I hope that Michelle will speak to that a little bit later if she doesn't join in any moment to address that. Let's move to the next section, if that's okay, panelists, and Dr. Alyssa, to talk about impact. And we have a few questions. I don't think that we necessarily have to go through each one, but the team has sort of divided these into 3 sections: impact, why, and moving forward. And we want to spend a little bit of time just talking about impact. And so with that, I'll toss over to Dr. Kwam to decide how she wants to present these to our panelists.
Absolutely. And I just have to say, so far, this is fabulous. This is just so enjoyable for me and so stimulating. And I'm laughing because the chat, someone had put, while HB was talking, and as a parent, you never stop worrying. And my mom still calls me and texts me, are you okay? So it never goes away. And I think that's just the cycle of life, right? And so when we think about impact, I think the way that I conceptualize this is the impact to the child directly, the impact to the family, the immediate family, and then the impact to the community, the kin group, the extended family, things of that nature. And so I would want to start with the direct impact to the child, him or her or they. And so Gisette, could you maybe piggyback off of some of what you had said previously about the impact to a parenting style to a kid's sense of self and sort of their place in life? How does that impact a kid?
So some of the outcomes that we have seen, and through research, I'm going to say one of the biggest ones is the inability to practice boundaries as they get older. They lack empathy at times because of the harshness that they have had to face. It's difficult for them to have empathy for others, difficult to set boundaries and gain the respect of others. We teach people how to treat us, right? And many times, if you've been through so many things and have harsh words thrown at you, and we're going to go back to what Mr. Neal said, regular basis, right? So on a regular basis, if you are not afforded the ability to have a voice, make choices, be spoken to in a respectful manner, you may not be able to do those things. As a result, you may have problems in school, lack of respect for authority figures, lack of respect for your peers, and lack of respect for yourself at the end of it.
Absolutely. One of the things that I've seen in my work with child abuse is kids who become over-sexualized very early on, and they kind of grow up really, really quick, right? Because they have this model, this like shining thing to mimic, to echo, and the pattern from that shining thing to mimic and echo this parent is not the healthiest or not the most securely attached, and often that leads to these externalizing sexualized behaviors. And you know, all you have to do is walk around, well, not right now, but previously, walk around a mall and you see all these kids with acting in very, very adult ways. And it's, yeah, that lack of boundary, lack of appropriate intimacy, things like, and really like an understanding of your own body, right? Yeah. Go ahead.
And that brings about judgment of others, right? Many times when you're parentified and you're taking care of your younger brothers and sisters, and your parents may provide you with too much information at an age when you're not quite ready to take it all in, right? Then you are thrust into adulthood when you may be only from 12 to 14 years old, but you've been taking care of your brothers, younger brothers and sisters, siblings for so long that you want to be an adult. You are thrust into adulthood, so you're going to do adult-like activities, right? And it brings about such a huge judgment from the community because they don't know what you're going through. All they see is you walking around the mall and being labeled a fast-tail girl.
Well, and I want to add something there too. It reminds me of the conversation we had in a couple of programs ago where somebody talked about the adultification of brown kids and the way in which brown kids, the research shows, seem older than they are when we have a situation like Tamir Rice or we have something like Mike Brown, and therefore they are treated like adults rather than children as we do white kids. So I'm glad that the parenting series has acknowledged that there's no universal child, there's no universal parent, that these things are quite specific. At the same time, there are some ways in which there are many things that intersect and are shared.
Absolutely. And HB, I'm curious as to your thoughts, how this sense of self with a kid and a parenting style or parenting styles can impact sort of the immediate family, the siblings, maybe even some of the close kin family. I'm the oldest of four, and I make the joke that each of my sisters had different parents because they were different parents. I was the experiment, right? The oldest one, and they didn't know what they were doing with me. And so I'm curious as to your thoughts about how toxic parenting or parenting in general can impact the family.
No, without a doubt. And, you know, I had the privilege to be the youngest and then the middle and then the oldest at one point and then the middle all again, right? So 11 siblings overall. Right, exactly. And working with at-risk youths for 25 years, you know, all across the U.S. from the rich families to everything else. A couple things that I've observed that we learn, I firmly believe we learn love, unconditional love, just the concept of unconditional love. That no matter my mistakes, I'm going to be wrong, but somebody's going to love me, hug me, not take affection away from me. We learn that at home. And that gives us a stability and a comfort. as we move on through life. We also learn self-love. We learn how we should be treated by other people. It's hard to accept someone yelling at you in a relationship if your parents never yelled at you that way consistently, right? So you say, hey, hold up. No, I'm not used to this. You know, I see the red flags early on versus us being conditioned to abusive behavior. So when we're in relationships, it doesn't create a red flag because, you know, I've survived it before. It's okay. So, you know, learning who we are and how to love ourselves is massively, massively connected to that. And, you know, you could come back from that if your foundation is chipped, but it take a lot of work because that's your foundation. And it's adults right now, including many of us on the line, myself included, that's still fixing the foundation of things that may have gotten chipped when we were younger. Another aspect is making sure we're not breaking their spirits. You know, discipline is important. Boundaries are important. But if every time they bring up even a good point, we argue them down, don't question me, don't talk back to me, you know, the impact of that is affecting their ability to debate, affecting their willingness to stand up for themselves, and to push forward when someone is treating them bad in school or anywhere else. They may just get small and not know how to advocate for themselves because we didn't give them the opportunity to advocate at home. Home is the safe place to learn how to figure the world out. So I could push back against my dad a little bit because it may get a little heated, but it's safe. It's still safe. So I can learn how far I can push an adult, how far I can push a conversation, how far, you know what? This is not like talking to a peer. Learn those differentials, right? So all of these things are important. And if we don't have that, then a kid don't know how to advocate for themselves if we go too hard. If we don't discipline them at all and teach them boundaries and these different things, now they're abusive to other people. So if your child becomes an abuser, that's also toxic parenting. That's a problem. That's a challenge if they're out here hurting other individuals. And lastly, I'll just say anger and impulse issues, control issues, because we haven't allowed them to learn how to communicate. And when you can't communicate, you get frustrated. When you're in an argument and your words not coming out right and you feel like people not understanding you, you get riled up, right? Communication is effective, is key. And if they don't have the opportunity to learn how to have that one-on-one, especially now where everybody living online, the lack of empathy, as it was said earlier, right? If they're not learning how to communicate at home, they're not gonna learn it nowhere else, anywhere else. They're not learning it on social media. They're not learning it through text messages. They're not learning it through these different things. So we have to be their communication instructors as well, or they go through the world quiet or angry. And they need to have more options than that.
Michelle, did you want to comment or would you comment briefly? Because I didn't want to misrepresent your words. Michelle Mace, to our audience, is the co-founder of Come Rain or Shine Foundation that is underwriting our parenting series. So maybe you could comment on the notion of reparenting or whatever else you feel that's relevant to the impact here. Thank you for being with us tonight.
Yeah, of course. I didn't want to jump in and interrupt all our panelists and the great conversation that's going on. I would pick up first, I think, on what Harold was saying about communication. And I don't know if you can see this, if I should shut the light off behind me, but this book is one that we're giving away tonight, I think, as some door prizes or drawing raffles. And the title of the book is Children Learn What They Live. And what Harold's been talking about is teaching our kids to communicate. Where do our kids learn the behaviors? And this book is about parenting to inspire values. And I got this when my boys were very little, but it's, and the foreword was written by, remember the book Chicken Soup for the Soul? So the woman who wrote the foreword of this book, but it's really a simple read, and it's about just recognizing that everything that we're doing with our kids is what is a teaching moment. So they are watching you and they are paying attention to your behaviors as much as or more than to your words. And so what Harold was saying about them learning how to communicate, they're watching you. Do you yell at your Do you yell at their father? Do you yell at, other people? How do you communicate in the grocery store? Do you drive with road rage? So they're seeing all these behaviors, and that's how they're learning what's okay. That's how they're learning not to yell at their partners when they're adults. That's how they're learning to not tolerate yelling or abuse or being sexualized. So what we do as parents isn't just the interaction of the moment with our child, but our child is with us. It's recognizing that 24/7 you have an observer with you when you're parenting, and they're watching and learning, and it's not like, okay, screens off, and while you're being inappropriate with the grocery store clerk, they're ignoring that. They're seeing all that. So parenting is recognizing that you just signed up for observation nearly 24/7, or for at least many hours a day. I would also go back, a couple points that have been brought up by our panelists is even as in our moments now as adults, we are carrying pain from our own childhoods, and we're having to work through those things. And so when we can recognize that we're not perfect and that we're having to reparent ourselves so that we can do a better job to parent our children, our work is never done. And I think that when we're successfully parenting, we get to do it for the rest of our lives. Our kids are still going to ask us for advice when they're 30, when they're 50, and they're going to tolerate and accept and want us in their lives to the extent that we've been generous while they were young. And so, that opportunity to do that, that door stays open, I think, more readily when we continue our own journey of healing and we reparent ourselves, and or when we acknowledge, how many parents forget to say I'm sorry to their children, or just don't think they need to. We have to own our mistakes and say, I'm sorry, and I didn't do that right, or can I have a do-over? And I think those are all important parts of parenting. And it shows our kids that we're learning beings, and it teaches them that they're learning beings, and that they too can evolve over the course of their life. They're not fixed, rigid individuals. So
thank you, Michelle.
I love I love the way that you said that, because it's really about building resiliency, which is a muscle, and you don't build it unless you work it. And HB kind of said the same thing too, in that toxic parenting is this repeated negative manipulative behavior over time, whereas healthier parenting, or productive parenting, whatever word we want to use, is repetitive, long-term, positive, affirmative, communicative, responsive behavior to a parent. So the way that you were describing 24/7 parenting was like you have these little trolls all around your house all the time.
I like to refer to it as, kind of my favorite word inside our foundation is conscious parenting. I think that to the extent that we stay present and conscious, and we recognize that whether they're little or big or adults, they're watching us. They don't quit watching us. And who doesn't want to be, have that be valued by our parents? Even today, like the most important person that could give me a compliment today would be my mom. She knows me best. If she says it, it's got to be authentic and real, and, or my dad. So I think to recognize that we have that power with our children, and what we say really gets stuck in their head as a tape, and it's really important. And so that authenticity of that relationship, the person that chooses to parent us from birth, or to parent us at whatever time in their life they came into our lives, becomes a really important voice in our head. And so being conscious that we have that role with people is, I think, one of my important, things that I'd like to do with our foundation is just raise the awareness to parent consciously.
Sometimes just knowing that changes how you parent. It's just that little tidbit of, oh, hey, they're watching you and you're learning. Yeah.
Well, and I want to extend that, so that, and which is what we've tried to do with parenting since we started the series in the fall, is know that we are not just talking about those who are parents, but we're talking about those extended families and those who nurture and those who care give. I shared with everybody the James Baldwin quote about, I can't believe what you say because I see what you do. That is not just about parents. That's actually every one of us, where somebody is looking at what we are doing, and we may be saying all of these things, but doing something. And that's where the self-reflection part comes in our I keep bringing this up because the self-reflection, there's no particular order. It's just alphabetical here, but the extent to which we can self-reflect on what we are doing that may have gotten a kind of response from a child or someone else who was looking at us. And keep in mind, the parenting doesn't have to be legal. It doesn't have to be biological. It's anybody for whom we are caring in that sort of paternal role. And I'll say one final thing is, I don't know if you know about this, Doctor, or maybe you do. I've heard this term recently called childism. Have you heard of that term? Does that sort of fit this conversation a little bit when it talks about the privilege that adults have who have done nothing to earn the right to be a parent and all the things that go along with it?
To an extent, I mean, I think so. I think I'm thinking about my work that I've done with parents involved in child welfare, and how, you know, this was years ago before we even talked about trauma, and I was seeing families come in the system time and time and time again, and I was like, what's going on here? And I only came to find out later on that most of these parents had long histories of toxic parenting experiences, neglect, abuse, isolation, mental illness, whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of skated through young adulthood. We're stable, we're doing okay. Boom, became parents.
Mm-hmm.
And that parenting was actually the trigger for them to I don't want to say regress, but to have to all of a sudden deal with their own stuff, right? And it's often not abusive. It's just it's neglect. It's not being prepared to do that. So I think it really is appropriate. And this is this idea of intergenerational parenting, the transmission of parenting over time, and how your life is your blueprint, and you help write that blueprint for a kid that then they seek. HB was talking about this, who they date, they find their worth.
Mm-hmm.
What they look for in a partner is the default of what their parents, sort of drew out for them. So I think it's a very profound thing to think about, the experience of becoming a parent in of itself, and that context and the extended family surrounding that. It's very, 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 sorry about that. It's very, very, very complex.
Actually, let me just clarify. Somebody's asking, what is childism? I said it's a new term that I've learned, so it's actually not the same as adultism. So if you look that up, it's prejudice against children, however that prejudice manifests itself. So it is not exactly the same as adultism. It's coined in a book by Elizabeth Young Bruhl, Bruehl, and it's called Childism, Confronting Prejudice Against Children.
Yeah. So
I think there's a fine line between the adultism. There certainly may be intersections there, but childism, as I said, is a thing.
Yeah.
And this particular author compares it to sexism and homophobia and all those other isms that we talk about, which become systems of privilege.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I think that's a really great social science phenomenon, is childism. I think that is, so I'm a segmentation specialist. I study the American consumer, and I look at us in 68 buckets of people on a daily basis and how we behave and act. And one of the ways in which we categorize or put people in a bucket is we categorize by younger years, which means you're under the age of 45, so sometimes even under 55 now, which is exciting, right? So that could categorize you as a younger years segment. Then we categorize by family life, which just means there's some portion of wealth or of your money in the household a significant portion of the household spending is going towards children. Now that could mean you're pregnant and you're buying all kinds of baby things, or it could mean you're spending money on college. So family life is a very broad category. And then there's this mature years. So there's a bunch of buckets that are in these kind of mature years where there's no longer kid-fluenced spending. But when we look at childism, and as a segmentation specialist looking at these buckets, really a third, of the buckets are defined in family life. That means that there's 2/3 where they're not thinking about kids. And now, it doesn't mean they don't like them, but there is a significant notion that we have to be conscious of about there's a lot of people in society today that aren't interacting with children or with grandchildren or with any notion of being responsible for the development of young people. And so they don't understand. And the moment that I think somebody said you get thrown into parenting, right? Or the minute that you finally become responsible or choose to become responsible for developing another human being, you don't look at the world the same way. It's like something something in your brain just flips and you go, oh my gosh, I thought it was totally okay to have, this going on until now I'm responsible for, this little person. And suddenly your values shift. And I think it's, whatever we can do, there's organizations out there like Generations United that are lobbying groups for multi-generational, intergenerational connectivity, keeping the generations connected so that we can prevent childism or prevent adultism, because people could discriminate against old people or against children. And I think the more we can keep our generations connected, the healthier it is for parents, for children, and for families. And so that we should never forget that we were once children, or that we're going to someday be old people, and that we can, I encourage all of you, look up Generations United. It's a fabulous nonprofit lobbying group that tries to make sure that we stay connected intergenerationally. So,
well, and keep in mind also, there's a way in which no matter how old we are still children to our parents. And that's one of those things that will lead to some future conversations in our parenting series when we talk about aging and parenting and that sandwich generation of both being parented at the same time we are parenting. Dr. Kwam, could you move to the why section?
Absolutely. I'm eager to get there because this is such great context for the why. So we have an understanding of now sort of the impact of these behaviors and parenting styles on kids, on families, on communities. And so in thinking about why does this happen, I think it's important to know that people justify what makes sense to them. So trying to make sense of your world and organize it is one of the ways that we try and parent and live and work, right? And so I want to start with HB. I want you to give us your thoughts a little bit on how this conversation and how this dialogue varies from cultures and across cultures and within cultures, and then perhaps what can we do in a culturally embedded way to teach parenting strategies and maybe rewrite some of those blueprints.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And the culture aspect is a big deal. I know, and even across cultures, people they have reasons for their parenting, reasons for everything. There's a reason I tell people all the time, if you talk to anybody long enough, they'll give you a reason for anything they did. You know what I mean? Serial killers got books about their reasons. That don't make it okay. So one of the things I heard, it didn't kill me. And I had to tell them, I want to do more than not kill my kids. Like, can I raise the bar a little bit higher than not, having death occur, right? So not killing ain't good enough. But when I think about this on a cultural standpoint, which is important, an important part of the conversation, because I also recall some cultures have more luxury than other cultures in America. And to ignore that is dead wrong. I'm a father of Black children. period. I have a Black son. And like Dr. Lester mentioned, you know, I see Tamir Rice and I always only saw a child. Whereas there's an entire segment of the country, a good majority, that would have saw Tamir Rice as a man. My son is the most tender character in the world. He's just an absolute sweetheart. And in 2 years, he grew 9.5 inches. In 2 years alone, right? And so he's like a ½ inch taller than me now, and he's not even 15 yet. So from a distance, he got his locks and these different things, but he's also an absolute scholar, gifted kid. You know what I mean? He took the ACTs when he was 9 and scored a 21. So certain cultures see a young man, whereas other people that's, you know, Black folks, they see his face, they see he's a child, right? And so I have to also prepare them not just to be happy, but to survive. And some cultures don't have the luxury of a long learning cycle. I got to tell my kids, you don't have until you're 20 to figure all these things out. I need you to get it right now. You just don't have that luxury. You don't have the luxury. One of the biggest challenges culturally, racially, in our country is, and one of the biggest divisions is forgiveness. And some groups get a lot more forgiveness than other groups. They are allowed to make a certain amount of mistakes that other groups aren't allowed to make. And it's not just racially. You hear it with boys will be boys, let it go. But if a girl did the exact same thing, they'll be in total trouble. We look at how Black children are being suspended in schools at ridiculous levels. Ridiculous how Black children are seen as threats, even though they've done nothing but advocate for themselves in certain situations. And so I have to keep all of that in mind. And I tell my children all the time, I don't want you to be afraid, but I need you to be aware. So trying to balance that is a challenge. And then sometimes I need to have a level of sternness that has to occur. And when I hear judgments outside of the culture, sometime on how certain parenting is done, there's a lack of understanding, right? This is not just my child throwing a tantrum in a store. This could turn into my child not knowing how to engage publicly. And when I'm not around, he do that same thing and get arrested because they overreacted about it. So having to parent with the country in mind is an extra layer of effort and responsibility and fear as a parent that everyone doesn't have. You know what I mean? That's just not everybody's story. And I don't blame you for not being everybody's story. You got the story you got. But there are some differences there. So I'm hesitant to engage in people who are judgmental of other parenting situations. If you don't have a whole lot of money, what you do for childcare is very different. I hear, couples where one person has the ability to stay home and parent. That's very different from both parents having to work. That's very different from both parents having to work. So we can't really have judgments from that side of the fence. Does that make sense? Right? So we got to be understanding of the resources and the extra things that have to be taught. I got to teach my daughter how to love herself in an environment that tell her hair is actually good enough to have her not get a job. She could be fired over her natural hair. You know what I mean? So how do I get her to love herself as just a young 11-year-old girl who's going to still go through all the things that 11-year-old girls go through as far as self-awareness, self-love, self-care, self-attraction, all these things with that extra piece on top of it, right? So I think we should seek to understand why there are some different parenting styles before we start to judge them.
Oh my gosh, you gave me the chills. That was so beautiful. Because it's profound, because for some parents what might seem toxic or strict or harsh is survival, and is, kids having to grow up because the world's waiting for them. I have a great colleague in the School of Social Work, and her whole body of work is around multi-ethnic, multiracial families where the parents are different race. They check different boxes and they have to sit down with their kids and talk explicitly about these things. And because it has to be explicit, everyone gets to benefit from their dialogue. I have another great friend. She's very, very light complected. She has very light red hair, and she has two very dark complected sons. And her husband is African. He's very dark. And her son came home one day and said, I got in trouble at school today. And she said to him, you need to stand up for yourself. You need to fight back. You need to be prepared. And her husband came home and said, no, 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 don't fight back because you're seen as violent. Like, stand down. And just that one story she told me made me think about my station as a white person very differently in terms of what I would tell my kids to do. Because standing up could be seen as an act of aggression, right? So again, you get at that
all the time.
Yeah. And this is why we see young Black men getting killed, and incarcerated at atrocious rates because of the societal image. So contending with that societal image across cultures it's hard, and yeah. She said, go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah, so I see a lot of our panelists talking or reacting to this notion of survival and being raised maybe in a financially disadvantaged situation. And I want to point out this book because this is another one that's happened to be in our list today for we're going to be giving to some of our attendees as kind of door prizes. But the book is called Our Kids, and it's about the American dream in crisis. And it's really confronting the inequity that is going on in how our children are being raised. And so it is a really important piece of work that is, it's kind of novelish and yet has a lot of research, and the notion is really to help us all understand as parents the inequities that we're creating by with financial disadvantage, with racial disadvantage, with gender disadvantage, and to understand how that's playing out. And it's putting our American dream in crisis, a dream for, healthy families and home ownership and, achieving our dreams is happening at the start, at birth, and because we have such inequity. And so what can we do to raise the consciousness of society to realize that all kids aren't getting a fair shot at things? And how can we level that so that we can be less judgmental of parents who are having to parent out of a variety of circumstances that are sometimes just tied to survival. We should all be focusing on living, not surviving. And so how do we help our kids live? And when HB talked about, some ethnicities don't have a long history and experience of or memory of getting to do certain things or be a certain way, how they have to overcome that. So I think this is a great resource called Our Kids, and I would encourage our attendees to pick it up if you're not one of the lucky recipients of the book today, but to really understand this inequity that's going on because of financial disadvantage and ethnic disadvantage.
Well, and may I add something also? And thank you, HB, for completing this idea about no universal child, no universal parenting, no universal parent. And I want to sort of highlight a recent documentary called Push Out, the criminalization of Black girls in schools. It's a mini documentary, so that'll be on our resource list, because I also want to make sure that this conversation at least underlines, highlights, underscores intersectionality, that there are layers We have not talked about parents of children with disabilities. That's a whole sort of set of strategies that have to be undertaken there. So when we're talking about this, and it's interesting that we are in this moment with this program tonight in this space, when so much about parenting is happening in this national, global, local conversation now. You know, to be able to have children out of school now directly affects the parents. What are the parents doing now? And if the parents are losing their jobs, and if the parents are losing their livelihood, how is that impacting the child? And how are children responding to this moment now? I mean, there are all kinds of teachable moments that are not choreographed, that are forced upon us. And so the impact of this is certainly important and timely. So we couldn't have planned this, but it feels relevant to me. It feels relevant to me. And I hope that something from this conversation will give us hopefulness and give us some guidance and direction. So I just wanted to add that as a resource. It'll be on our resource list. Again, it's called Push Out: The Criminalization of Black Girls in Schools.
I think you're right, Neil, that this time of social distancing has actually, I'm excited about it. What it has done is pushed us home, and it has forced us into parenting. So some people who may be using work or travel or other things to deal with not having to parent or not wanting to deal with parenting, or have put off certain difficult discussions with their kids, or don't know how to interact with their kids, are now finding themselves in a situation where it is like, for me, it's like sort of like, oh, great, this is a wonderful platform where we can suddenly bring resources forward that people are actually going to say, hey, I need that book on how to do some little things with my kids, or how to reconnect to my teenagers, or things like that. So,
well, and I think we're appreciating our teachers now in ways that we haven't appreciated teachers. And then I've seen several memes that say, now tell us what you think about what's going on with your child now. So that's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's like they're no longer someplace else for 8 hours for those who are in school versus those who have been homeschooled. People are always asking, when we have these kinds of conversations, how do you move forward though? And I'm always sort of responding with this kind of cliched refrain of, well, let's examine, before we figure out how do we move forward, let's sort of figure out how we got here. So I'd like for us to continue to sort of think about this in terms of the intersections between past and present, and the intersections between the fact that who we are now is who we were as children, and who we are now is what we may be modeling for those children who are our children, but those who are not our children. So if Dr. Kwame, if you could move us into that section we're calling moving forward, then we may come up with some strategies that can actually move us forward, but also in the present.
Absolutely. And, you know, I saw this cheesy commercial like a day or so ago about how we only have 37 minutes of time together as a family on any given day. And I just think that's the negative side to the enhancement of technology, right? Is that we're so connected, but also somewhat disconnected. So I want to loop back to Chisette and have her sort of give us your thoughts on everything we've talked about with culture and modeling and teaching parenting. And then from your perspective and your work, what does all of that look like in terms of for a child? How do we create a better environment for a child that is culturally grounded and authentic and resilient, responsive?
So working in the foster care system, we were talking about being thrust into parenting. And I'm going to tell you something. The mentors for foster care children, as well as foster parents, owners of group homes, and residential providers, sometimes they are thrust into parenting, right? And they don't have that background. And many times we work with foster parents or mentors who come from a different ethnic background than the children that are in the foster care system. And it's all about learning about different cultures. And one of my responsibilities is to train and educate, right? I want to train and educate people and not dissuade them from coming into the foster care system, helping these children that so badly need the help. They need the positive role models. But again, they have to be cognizant, right? That maybe what you did as a teenager may not work for this African-American youth. When a foster mom is reaching out for help, right, and she needs the proper resources, there's a plethora of resources out there. I think a lot of times when parents don't have the resources or access to the resources, that's where the disconnect comes in. And so just getting the information out there about all the programs that are available, building resilient families for one, where, you know, there are agencies that come into your home. Every child does not need to be removed. There's many programs where we can help parents, teach them, help them to learn not the right things to do, but what's right for your family. Because for each family, it's going to be a different mix of what's needed. A lot of times it's the lack of support. Everybody doesn't have a big family. Me, myself, I moved here from Louisiana. I had family, but not close family, right? And so I was here with my children. My husband got a divorce. And it took people that were not my blood relatives who were what? They became the natural support system. That is so important. A natural support system of people who can gather around you to help you, because it truly does take a village to raise a child. I wanted to go back a little bit about something that one of the panelists said. Things that were accepted many years ago, like maybe myself riding the bus all over Oakland, all through elementary, because my parents had to work and they shared custody of me. No way in the world would I let my child ride a bus anywhere before they were probably teenagers. And so what is that? That is a reaction. Although I was fine, although I maneuvered the bus system, it was normal back then, right? So 70s, 80s, it was normal for little kids to catch the bus, to be latchkey kids. But in the day and age that we're in, my parents would have been probably burned at the stakes for letting me, you know, open the door for myself and let myself in the house at 8 or 9 years old. In this day and age, it's just all that reset and rethinking about things that maybe were okay back then that may not be okay now, or maybe it is okay. And maybe we need to do like HB said and think about how mature the child is. What's the construct of the family? How is that family makeup? What's going on in different parts of all of the greater Phoenix area? You can go to a reservation, they may live a different way and have different thoughts and opinions about things. But I think it all boils down to respect and education, and really just being very respectful of how people do things when we're educating and introducing new ideas of how we can do things a little bit better. And main thing is getting those resources out there and showing that there is help available.
Yeah, that's so funny about the bus. I used to take the subway as a kid all the time, and now I would need to go with like 3 other people as an adult, right? So that's really interesting because the social scientists and the sociologists have looked at sort of the evolution of families over time, and how it wasn't that long ago, 100-ish, give or take, years ago, we lived in groups of extended families of 150, 250 people. And we had lots of aunts and uncles and lots of extended family and lots of supports. And now over time, I think I read recently that most people don't have more than 5 or 6 close contacts at any given time that they can reach out to. So my students always ask me, and when I was in the field, my parents would always ask me, you know, what can I do? And the number one thing you can do is help, if you're a professional, is help other people get connected to social supports. So when you as a professional fall away, get promoted, move on, funding dries up, whatever, you're helping them build a natural support system. That's where resiliency is. It's not in doing it by itself, but building that kin, whatever that looks like for you. And if you're a professional doing this work, being very humble in that and really coming at it from a position of service. And so HB, you're nodding your head, just that drew in a lot of community aspects and a lot of familial and cultural aspects. And so I want to ask you, given that you came from a large family and you have teenagers and you're in the thick of it, already thinking about what a grandparent life looks like.
Right.
What are some of your top strategies? And then I want to go to Chisette, and then I want to go to Michelle. What are some of your top strategies for how parents can be more mindful and how we can take this conversation and make it stick? What can we do moving forward tonight as community members and as parents to be more mindful? What do you think?
Without a doubt. No, I appreciate that. And, you know, I had to be raised by the community. I wasn't raised with either of my parents. My mother died very, very young. And, you know, my father wasn't around until we got a chance to reconnect in my teenage years. And now we have a wonderful relationship. But it was a lot of mentors in my life. And I will say, even without a parent, either of those parents, I always had male and female father, mother energy. I always had that support. I always had a mother figure. I never was out without a father figure, a mother figure, giving me advice or shooting ideas and things my way. So and you know, probably some people watching this now is one of my many moms or dads, right? Checking this out on Facebook. But as far as what we can do immediately, what we could do right now, you know, one of the things I would say is start with the end in mind. It's not just about getting through the day. It's about what type of adult do I want to be the end result of my parenting, right? I want someone who's compassionate. I want someone who's socially minded, socially aware, self-aware, mentally healthy, emotionally healthy, being able to take care of themselves, discipline. So all these different pieces is what I want. So I'm constantly running it through my filter. Am I feeding into the person that I would like for them to grow into, right? And with those human characteristics, you know what I mean? And also, because any parent that cares is worried about their parenting, questions themselves constantly. Like I haven't met anyone that doesn't question themselves constantly that actually care about the parenting. So sometimes, and one of the biggest traps I see parents fall into is they parent out of guilt because they feel bad the relationship didn't make it, that they're not making the money they want to make to be able to give them everything they feel their children deserve, because they're still working through, you know, whatever they're working through. And it's just not the perfect and ideal. So they parent out of guilt and they allow certain things. You can actually have toxic privileged parenting. When I've seen children from really good homes smacking their parents around, yelling at them, and just because you're not yelling doesn't mean it's still not toxic, right? It's like leadership, you know, it's not servant leadership. That's what you want. That's more slave leadership, you know what I mean? Or self-serving leadership on those two ends. So you got to make sure you don't go too far and understand that no matter what you and your family have been through, if you've been homeless at some point, if you couldn't feed, food was tough at one point, if it was an ugly divorce, you know, at one point, and you did your best to be amicable and these different things, you can't let guilt drive your parenting.
So you're talking a lot about being very self-reflective and very honest, but
very self-reflective, and
also just doing that work as a parent.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. That honesty. Every now and again, I got to talk to my kids, and you know, my son, he's Harold Branch the fourth. We call him Quattro affectionately, and my daughter Ella. And sometimes I got to sit them down, like, hey, let me just talk to you. You know what I mean? We got to just have a conversation. You know, I love you, but check this out. What you did, that's real disrespectful. I don't like it. I don't deserve it, and it's not fair. So I'm gonna need us to engage differently, because my next response isn't going to be this. You're pushing me outside of this. And they appreciate that real comment. Like, oh, I stepped over the line. My bad, Dad. It won't happen again. But before I go off on the deep end, having that conversation. Another thing is associations. Associations is everything. So what kind of parents and other adults are you around? And I'm around adults and parents that if they see me going over the deep end, they'll pull me to the side like, H, relax, man. He's 14. It's going to happen. Like, don't trip. So having other adults in my life that would check me, because I'm gonna go too far. I'm gonna get upset when I shouldn't. I'm gonna get tired of kids. They're gonna get tired of me. I get tired of myself sometimes. Like, these things happen. You know what I mean? So being able to have other people that's checking me is really important. And I will give one last thing just to kind of, pass it over to my fellow panelists. Do I want to be treated that way? They're still human beings. And if I'm wrong, I have no problem being corrected, but I don't want to be yelled at. I have no problem being told that I overstepped somebody's boundaries, but I would like for them to forgive me or hear me out so I can explain that it was a mistake and not my intention. I will want them to give me the benefit of a doubt if I feel like I've earned it. So what would I want in that situation? And I try to give them, that's our goal, is to give what we would like to receive. But once again, it's not going to be perfect. We're going to mess it up. Being able to apologize to our kids is everything. I believe that's huge.
You talked about the kin relationship, not just for the kids, but for the parents. That peer-to-peer support, someone to be like, that was golden, or, you're a little too hard.
Absolutely.
That's
absolutely.
wonderful.
Absolutely. And in a co-parenting relationship, make sure that we're not choosing our ego over the betterment of our child. And, we haven't really touched on that, but let me say this. A child is better off, unless it's a dangerous situation, having both parents in their lives. Unless it's dangerous, that a child is better off with that. Even if we can't stand each other, even if it went bad, even if I can't rock with them, getting in the way of that parent being a parent to that child, or disrespecting the other parent to the child, is one of the most harmful things we can do. Because that child, in their understanding, they are 50% of both parents. And if I talk about one parent, I'm telling them they're 50% horrible, 50% terrible, 50% not worth anything, 50% whatever the case may be. And I may not say it verbally, I may show it through my behavior, I may show it through my actions. And in those are the moments we have to set our ego aside. And it's probably best for us to totally cut off and never, ever, 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 ever speak to this person again. But we had a kid and we don't got that option. So we got to behave in a certain way, no matter how hard it is. So I just want to put that co-parenting piece, because the majority of parents are co-parents in America, the majority. So just want to really put that piece out there. If we're not choosing what's best for them, then we are not doing our job as a parent. So those are a couple of points, I think.
Wonderful, wonderful. Gisette, what do you think? What are your thoughts?
I 1,000% agree with HB, but I do want to reference Toni Morrison as well as Maya Angelou. Something that I train on is letting the kids see how you feel. Not with just saying, right? When you see a child walk into a room, do your eyes light up? Do you make them feel welcome? Do you show them with your expressions? Just like your real expression. How do you feel about them coming into the room? How do we make another human being? Anybody, even an adult. Even my adult children, I really try hard. Wow, I missed you. I haven't seen you lately. I want to see you more. Little kids need that so much. My granddaughter, when she walks into the room, and it is from the bottom of my heart, I get excited, and I think kids need that. And adults need that. Human beings, we're going to go back to that. We're humans. We want to feel wanted and needed and appreciated. And we want to know that somebody's happy that we came and somebody's happy that we're born. Maya Angelou talked about every time life knocked her down, she went back to her mother's home, and her mother would say to all the people in the boarding house, look who's here, Maya and baby. My baby is here. And she would not make her feel sad for a failed relationship, a lost job, a opportunity gone wrong, but she would make her feel happy that she was back home we would want our children to come back to us instead of staying in a toxic relationship or a bad situation, right? So instead of, and I'm going to go ahead and take this as talk to myself too. When our adult children, not only our little children, but our adult children, when life knocks them down and we got to pick them up, don't be mad about it. Just be glad you're there. And so that's one of the points I wanted to make. Really making kids, as well as any human being, feel excited when you see them, and make them feel wanted and needed. And it really helps, right? Because it's contagious. It's contagious. Just like all the bad things that we're talking about are contagious now. We want our response to people. When someone FaceTimes you, hi, how you doing? You know, you want to make somebody feel good.
Beautiful. I always think about the work of Ram Dass, and he talks about how we're really all in this together, and we are who we are because we belong to each other. So, you know, this idea that we're you know, it's a sacred bond that we have. That was wonderful. Thank you. We are running a little bit over on time, but I'm all about going with the flow. I want to see if Michelle, if you have anything else to add, and then we'll go back to you, Dr. Lester, to transition us on.
Okay.
I would say this, that I think what, you know, what Harold and Chisette have said is really right on. I wrote down 3 things, and I would say show up, you know, and really with what Chisette was saying is that expression you have on your face, you know, the way that you show up, be curious, be interested. And I go back to this yoga class that I take, and the instructor inevitably always puts us in a very uncomfortable posture, and then has us, you know, reach our arms out, and then says, your face. Pretend that you're reaching for your 4-year-old self. Would you want to approach yourself? You know, like, you're in a, so what expression do you have on? So sure, you're in the middle of something uncomfortable or complicated in your adult world. But whether it's your teenager that shows up, or your partner that shows up, or your kid that shows up, how are you able to stop in that moment and show up and be curious and be interested and pause and really, you know, be there for them? So I think just grabbing what Harold and Chisette has said, I would say that. And then I think you asked, Alyssa, what we could do tonight. What can we do now? And I think something that we can all do now, because we're on this conversation, is that when we hang up the phone or the Zoom call tonight, I think we can all go to the Project Humanity's website, and we can take the Humanity 101 pledge. And I think we should print that pledge out and make it a contract with ourselves and our children. We talked about having kin hold us accountable. I'd say have your kids hold you accountable. Yeah. Show the kids that you're taking the pledge. Ask them to take the same pledge. Yeah. And make this the new way of relating to one another, and hold each other accountable. So it's not personal and finger pointing so much anymore, but it's like, could we do that? Could we have that conversation over with kindness? Could I go self-reflect a little while, and then we have this conversation? And I had this idea that in making this Humanity 101 pledge, the parenting contract, and the kid signs it and you sign it, I also came up with this idea, and maybe this is like a Oprah Super Soul Sunday kind of conversation, but what if there's 7 things here? What if every day of the week, the family just agreed to say, let's focus on one of these. So if it's Sunday self-reflection day, that's the one you focus on. And imagine weeks later, how many times you've had Fridays of kindness and Thursdays of integrity. And you just put that at top of mind. One word, one idea, one concept, you and your kids. And after a month, you've done each of those 4 times. Think of the growth of the family and of the parenting and the parent-child relationship. So I think that we can all leave this conversation and we could commit to take that pledge, sign that pledge online, and it could start changing our families tomorrow.
I like that. I like that. And I know that people are doing that now with gratitude. They're like, okay, every day I'm going to write down 4 things for which I am grateful. And I think that that's such a big umbrella that we could actually break that down as you suggested and look at this, you know, what are the ways that I've demonstrated compassion, but also what are the ways that I have received compassion? So that this is not an either or, but it's a both. And, you know, when people are talking about, well, I've run out of snacks to eat, I've run out of things to do, here are some things to do now. So this at least will take you through the next month based on Michelle's calculations here. I want to make sure that we give the attendees an opportunity to sort of crowdsource with us now so that we can talk about some of the tools and tips for healthy parenting behaviors. So take about a minute, all the participants, attendees, and sort of write down a couple of things that you know could be tools and tips for healthy parenting behaviors. And I know that healthy is a contested word, but healthy in the sense of what this conversation has tried to move toward. So let's see some of those sort of comments over in the chat section. Let's talk about healthy. We started off saying, what are some of the problematic ones? Let's talk about some of the healthy ones now. So let's see that sort of chat line light up now. I feel like I'm on a marathon now. Right, or a telethon, yes. So what are some of those healthy parenting behaviors?
Right away, we're getting at some of what HB said about self-reflection and self-awareness and
Yep.
forgiveness, mindfulness. Yes, thank you, Gisette. Listening, not to respond, but listening to receive. That's a big thing. Encouragement, good. I'm gonna do a little pitch for therapy. Like, part of doing the work is sometimes going to see somebody else, outsourcing it.
Was that a thumbs up?
That is a double thumbs up. Healthy boundaries.
Well, and keep in mind, therapy can take many forms too. There are lots of support groups out there. There are podcasts. There are telephone groups. There are all kinds of ways. And I'm learning that it really is a sign of strength to ask for help. To show that you can't do this alone. For those of you who know our Project Humanities, you know that our hand it's many people coming together. It's here on our website. It's on this little magnet that I keep holding up. It loosely comes from Booker T. Washington, separate as the fingers, yet one as the hand. So this is not the Thanksgiving turkey hand, but rather lots of people coming together. And I love the operative word can. So I like to think that we can do better if we become more aware, and that the awareness means nothing if there's no action there. So we can actually practice these things in more mindful ways. So what else are we seeing there?
We are seeing disconnection. So digital detoxes, that's super important. Demonstrating self-love and not striving for perfection. So you treat yourself well, your kids see the same thing. Show them how to live out loud. Beautiful, HB, that was beautiful. Grow your natural support systems. So neighbors, people, faith-based groups, hobby groups, you know, things that don't require internet all the time. And no time like the present, right? Figure out what your new start looks like. Being present, communicating, yes, forgiveness and self-care. Don't just survive, but thrive. So over the years of being busy and being pulled and clients and students, and I haven't been able to set down an hour for self-care every day, but I can steal 5 minutes, 5 extra minutes in the shower, 5 minutes in the car, 5 minutes, whatever, 5 minutes to call my mom, and you can steal it. Conversational turn taking. Ooh, beautiful. Open-ended questions versus yes, no. So tell me about your day versus did you have a good day? Everybody has a story. Yeah, good. Invite them to teach you. Yes. We should be wrong so many times as adults. Yes.
Well, and look how many times we've learned from our kids.
Ah,
You know, and we have this phrase in some communities that says out of the mouths of babes, if we would listen, which goes back to our little tagline for Project Humanities, talk, listen, and connect. And I love the fact that we have engaged in that tonight. I love the fact that we've tried not to provide answers, but yet to suggest strategies. And we hope that this has become a way of having a critical conversation that leaves us differently than we came into the conversation. So I had some aha moments, but I'd like to sort of move toward the end, first of all, by thanking our panelists for showing up and being present and bringing their perspectives that added. I'd like to thank Dr. Kwam for graciously being so nimble as we worked through whether or not we were going to have this program, and then the format that it has taken and our thinking and the evolution. I have to thank all of our Project Humanities teams, but I do want to give some time here to Michelle Mace to talk specifically. If you want to add something, you've given us some great ideas about the foundation, but I want to make sure that we highlight the foundation and its work and its commitment to parenting more broadly. So Michelle, maybe you could talk about the 3 books that you recommended, as well as what this means to the foundation and why.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Neil. And thank you all attendees and to Project Humanities, Rachel and Jocelyn and Shanna and Dr. Lester, the fact that, you know, we're in the middle of the crisis that we are in internationally, and we are all in this together, and everybody is canceling. I've had meetings canceled and travel canceled, and when we talked to Dr. Kwam, we said, you know, should we cancel this? And, you know, we all made a decision. No, like this is, let's do this. Let's find a way to do it with technology. I'm impressed and pleased that we forged ahead to have a conversation right now. And it is so relevant because we're all finding ourselves at home. And I wish the millions of people that are also finding themselves at home could have joined us tonight, but I hope that they will watch our recording and that they will find ways to access these same resources. I did make a few kind of prepared comments that I wanted to share with the group. And that is that we've all experienced life from at least one side of the parenting relationship because we were all kids once. So whether or not you're a parent on the call tonight, getting ready to parent, or we know we've all experienced it at least from one side. But as adults, we can proceed unconsciously to be really busy with life. And I think we're realizing now in this COVID time that as we pull things off our calendar, how many things of those were really that important anyway, right? And so I think that prior to COVID, and maybe we're realizing it, that we were kind of human doings. And this is a time to now come to be human beings. And often we were hurting each other obliviously with our busyness, avoiding our own pain, probably booking our schedule full of stuff just to avoid dealing with things. So I hope that in this COVID, we start to deal with our own humanity. I believe that parenting and how we were parented has seeded our individual behaviors today. So when I look at the state of our world, of our country, I think that parenting is at the root of all of it. And if we parent better, we'll have a better society. If we become more conscious and value what parenting is, I think that we will be agents for social change. And when we launched the Come Rain or Shine Foundation, I chose to focus our work on conscious parenting because I think that we need the opportunity to reparent ourselves and to parent our children so that we can have a better, more livable, more not, you know, my son says, don't even use the word tolerant, Mom. That's not a good word. Like, you know, we need to be more accepting, right? So I think that most of the decisions that we regret in life are ones that are made out of emotional reaction, and reaction is a path of least resistance. And I think that I'd like to see us Instead, I think reaction is oftentimes our own inner wounded child, our own wounded inner child. And I think that as we become conscious as adults, we make decisions to slow down. This COVID reaction is a conscious slowdown, right? And we're slowing down, hopefully enough to experience empathy and act from a sometimes painful but healing place that involves courageous self-reflection. So I think we're going to all come into a period of self-reflection here that's going to be really beautiful. Yep, it's coming. And I want to share that I learned about ASU Project Humanities 5 years ago. We talked about letting our kids teach us. I learned about Project Humanities from my son. My oldest son, Andrew, was a senior in high school here in a valley at Desert Vista High School. He was the president of his social studies club. He was looking for a speaker to discuss cultural awareness with his 180 member club. And he was intrigued by Dr. Lester's background. So we invited him and his wife, Adelina, to our home for dinner and visited around the table. And as my son was securing Dr. Lester as his speaker for this event, I was having an epiphany about the Humanity 101 values. And I started to realize something about those values, and they described my grandmother. And my grandmother embodied these values. And she was, at many times in my life, my parent. And as a social scientist, I started studying human aging and development when I was in college at ASU. And my intimate relationship with my grandmother made me love old people. And she and I both wanted her to live to be 100. And it's because we loved our time together. We couldn't imagine not having time together. And I remember running back to my dorm room after a lecture that I'd had on human aging and development to call her in rural Minnesota, and it was probably 30 below zero, not including the wind chill. And I wanted to let her know the good news that I had found out in my aging and development class, that the outer limits of life is 120. And I think I called her collect. We didn't have Zoom, we didn't have email. So I date myself a bit. But my relationship with my grandmother taught me that parenting is a collection and a continuum of behaviors. So parenting is a collection and a continuum of behaviors, deeply, not subtly, deeply impacting the development of others. So think about that as a definition of parenting: a collection and a continuum of behaviors deeply impacting the development of others. So when we talk about how we want to do it, or we think about beginning with the end in mind, as HB said, think about that. And she never viewed, so she always showed up. She was present, right? And she never viewed parenting me as a mandate tied to a biological connection. And I think when we stop viewing parenting as an obligation or a mandate because we're biologically connected to somebody or not connected to somebody, I think we'll do it differently. And so I would say that, one of the books that I mentioned earlier was Little Things Long Remembered. That's one of the titles of the books that I'd like, us to share. And it's really what my grandmother had done with me, is seeding all these great little memories that, because she showed up, because she was expressive the way that she was, because she planned and thought little activities or moments. And that is something that lives with people for a long time. Be those memories, for someone that you're developing, for someone that you're parenting. So, so the book Little Things Long Remembered, I'd like to just make sure we share that one. The other one was Children Learn What They Live. And the third was Our Kids, The American Dream in Crises. So sort of in closing, I chose the name Come Rain or Shine for our foundation, because I believe that love is selfless. And I think parenting is probably one of the most selfless things that you can do. And often our first chance to experience unconditional love in this life is from someone who chose to parent us. So Come Rain or Shine is about true love that exists. It's enduring, come rain or shine. And that's really the name of the foundation, and the focus on parenting, really comes from that. I would say that in using the conscious parenting notion and loving come rain or shine, it's about living with compassion and empathy for our kids, which means understanding age appropriate development. You're not done parenting when they're 16, 18, 21, off your health insurance or married. So it's a good idea to understand human aging and development and the outer limits of life, because you still might be parenting at 120. Conscious parenting is also about extending forgiveness to our kids, ourselves, our own parents, when they or we aren't doing it right. It's about acting with integrity, doing what we say we'll do, bringing people along emotionally when our plans change or need to change, learning how to say, I'm sorry. That's integrity. And it's about small acts of daily kindness and continual respect for our kids and for everyone that we encounter, because remember the book, children learn what they live. And so as we finish, it's really about self-reflection. And I do mean put away the 2x4. This isn't about self-abuse or flagellating because you didn't do some things right in the past. It's about seeing and feeling the reality of the impact that you can have on developing someone else. You might have some remorse. Maybe you should have remorse. That's okay. But use reflection to also see the things you did well and how you can pivot to achieve better outcomes. So I believe that conscious parenting can help children of all ages, all of us on this call, overcome adverse circumstances. And at the same time, I want to stress that bad parenting can take years to overcome and generations to resolve. So our kids, the American Dream in Crisis is a great example of that. Let's not create generations of damage by the way that we're choosing to parent. We can make different choices today, tonight. So in closing, I'd just like to share that I'm part of that Gen X, one of those latchkey kids. I was a latchkey kid. This social distancing that's going on right now is sort of oddly familiar. My younger son, Nick, was born in 9/11. So I was at the hospital when we were kind of socially distancing then and not letting people, do things in the normal way that the American public was used to doing them. And now he's a senior at Desert Vista High School and maybe going to graduate online. I don't know, amid this COVID, pandemic. So, he actually presides now over the same social studies club that Dr. Lester has spoken to for 6 years. Thank you, Dr. Lester, for that, and sharing the Humanity 101 values with a couple hundred kids every year, high school kids. So I think that this all comes back to Humanity 101. It's great parenting. It's a great parenting contract. I thank you, Neil, and your team for your commitment to spin the Humanity 101 paradigm to my passion and interest in parenting. I can't thank you enough. And I thank you all for the attending, and to our panelists as well. So, and I think we have some books to give away, so I'll turn it back over.
Okay, this is Shayna, and I'm going to jump in and do the book raffle. I have been using a random name picker online to draw some names for some books, the 3 books that Michelle had referenced during the event tonight. And so what we'll do is I'll contact you and get your information, and then we'll work on mailing you the book that you won. So the first name I drew, I have Magpie Watcher 22.
Yay!
Congratulations.
Jazz hands, jazz hands. Okay.
Okay. Winner number 2, Michelle Melton.
Jazz hands, jazz hands.
Yay. Okay, Dr. Lester, how many names am I drawing?
We're doing 5.
Okay, great.
Mhm.
All right, winner number 3, Taylor. Congratulations. Okay. Winner number 4, Mary Kay Garrett. And then last, winner number 5, we have Ariana.
Yay. Woo.
And these books are in the office, but keep in mind we're at our homes. So as soon as we can get to the office, we will give you an opportunity to choose the book that you want. And then we hope the others will feel inspired to find them in the library or online or however you can assess them. Keep in mind that this will be on a follow-up, and then maybe Jocelyn, you could step in as our project representative to talk about what happens after this program. Jocelyn?
Yeah, hi all. My name is Jocelyn and I'm a coordinator with Project Humanities. If you registered with an email account for this program, you'll be receiving a follow-up email in the coming days that will have resources that we mentioned, additional resources, a link to the recording of this webinar, a link to our website, all kinds of good stuff. So make sure that you have an accurate email address that you signed up with for us. Yes, with us. Yes, for us. And we'll get that to you as soon as possible. Thanks so much.
Yeah, and also did you just mention the feedback sheet that we need also?
That's
Did you mention-
Rachel.
Okay, Rachel?
Yeah, that's me, Rachel here. So I guess I'll share my video. No, I won't. Okay, my dog's sitting on my lap. Yeah, but after the end of this, there will be a link that populates on the front of your screen that will tell you to click a survey and do a feedback form. Please do take the time to fill it out. It will take no longer than, 2 minutes, 2 to 5 minutes, and we really appreciate the feedback so we can apply it to further events. And also, we would just love for some specific feedback on this format as well. It is something new we are trying. It is something that we are considering having available as an option even when we are back to in-person events. So please just let us know what you thought about the event. It really is super helpful. Thank you.
Yes. And I want to thank our panelists again. So round of applause for the panelists, for Michelle's ability to join us tonight as she has with the previous parenting programs. Thank our very talented Professor Kwam for facilitating and helping us think through this. And we thank all of you for spending time with us. We know that these are trying times, and we hope that this was an educational and fun distraction from those things we can't control. We wish you all good health. And please, please, please stay tuned as we update what we're going to be doing with our next programs. We are desperately trying to do another program on parenting and aging coming up. So stay tuned. And please, if nothing else, take the pledge. Now, that's only if you're committed to these principles. If you're not committed to these principles, we do not want to see your name on a list. What we want to see are names of people who are committed to living with compassion and empathy and forgiveness and integrity and kindness and respect and self-reflection. One final thing that I borrow from Black Theater Troupe David Hemphill. If you enjoyed our program, please spread it widely on social media. Tell everybody about it. Just gossip in good ways about the wonderful things that you heard tonight. If you didn't think it went so well, just be quiet and don't tell anybody. So thank you very much. And thank you, team, for accepting the challenge of pulling this off. And at this point, I'll sign off and tug my ear as Carol Burnett did. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Good night.